Hi, everyone. I'm Rosemary Miller here with Michael Del Castillo, a senior editor here at Forbes. Michael, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Rosemary. It's a pleasure.
Michael, I read your story. Jack Dorsey's Twitter rival prepares to unleash 1 million people onto a new kind of social network.
Yes.
Okay. Twitter has undergone some drastic changes.
Big time.
That have probably left a bad taste in people's mouths.
Some people.
Do you still have your verification check mark?
No, I do not. Thank you for asking.
Me neither. How does that make you feel?
It's a double-edged feeling. It's a complicated feeling. I get the free market move to only give people what they pay for. But I do know that there's a lot of people that worked really hard for those. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't like giving to famous people just for being famous, but a lot of work that went into getting them. Mm-hmm. And I think I put myself in that category as somebody that worked really, really hard to get to the point where I got that blue check mark, and to have it taken away was a little disconcerting.
I imagine.
Yeah.
That's that bad taste in your mouth.
It is. Yeah.
But this Twitter rival you mentioned, what puts it in the position, this is blue sky.
Yes.
What puts it in the position, in the running to actually be a rival? I see that you said it's preparing to have 1 million new users, but Twitter has, 450 million?
Depending on who you ask, somewhere between 250 and 500. Yeah. It's a difficult number because of all the bots and everything. But you're right. 1 million compared to all that is nothing. Mm-hmm. But there's a couple things that I think really kind of made this story resonate with me. First of all, they haven't launched yet. So this is 1.2 million people on a wait list. And they raised $13 million in venture capital, which at first glance seems like a tiny little amount of money. But a lot of companies with 13 million capital raised would kill for 1 million users before they even launch. So that's the first thing that kind of really makes it stand out to me. The second thing is the competitors in the decentralized social space are not traditional companies. So Nostr was built largely behind the scenes. This is another one of the big decentralized social competitors, Nostr. Nostr was built out of the spotlight in somebody's metaphorical basement, who we only know by their pseudonym, Fiat Joff, with no capital raised. And in fact, he did eventually end up receiving about $250,000 worth of Bitcoin from Jack Dorsey. And he's at 12 million users right now. That's 12 million users off $250,000 worth of Bitcoin. Now, Mastodon, another big competitor, has actually refused venture capital. Mm-hmm. And they're at 6.5 million users right now. So if money is the main measurer, these two social networks that have fundamentally raised no money at all, with 6 million and 12 million. And then this other one that has raised $13 million has 1 million users before it's even launched. It seems to me that this is just the beginning of what could be a huge impact that the company is going to make in the space.
And does it being decentralized make a difference? Because honestly, my mom, she does not care about if her social media is decentralized. She doesn't care about that. As long as her church friends are on there, she's happy.
Great point. The current decentralized social networks are not user-friendly by our centralized traditional social media standards. They're slow-moving. Sometimes messages don't send the first time. It can be difficult to find people. It can be difficult to even log in. There's a little bit more responsibility as far as account creation. You have to really manage your own keys and make sure that you're making sure that your passwords are protected, or you could lose that. Blue Sky seems to have what it might take to solve some of those problems. I've had a chance to play around on all these apps, and right now the unlaunched version of Blue Sky operates very, very, very smoothly. So I think that the goal for all of these platforms is to eventually get to the point where our moms can use them without having to think twice about it. But there's another facet of that question that I think is worth exploring a little bit, which is that we care about who is on our social networks. That is maybe the number one biggest factor in what makes us decide which social network we're going to use. We go to where our friends are. We go to where our family is. We go to where our colleagues are. We build our relationships there. We have hundreds, thousands, some people millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, if you're Elon Musk, followers on their social media accounts. And those groups of people are locked into those platforms. Now, that makes it really difficult to leave. If you're a mom whose family is already there, you're us with our colleagues there, you're somebody else with a musician with their fans, makes it really difficult to leave those social networks. But I think it's really important to ask that same question of the next generation of people, right? The next generation of people, their friends aren't on any social network because they don't exist yet. Their families aren't on any social network because they haven't been born yet. You know, like the next generation of social media users do not have an existing following anywhere. They're going to be starting from zero. And they're going to be asking themselves questions like, which one of these social networks is going to give me more freedom? Which one of these social networks is going to let me take my followers with me if I want to go to a competitor? And the answers to those questions are going to change over the years.
I think another selling point could possibly be people sometimes go to these small social networks to blow up. I've seen people, they get on TikTok in the early days. I believe Charlie D'Amelio, she's an example. Get on TikTok in the earlier days, blow up because there's no competition there.
Yes.
But for Twitter and Blue Sky, is this, not just Blue Sky, Mastodon, Nostr, is this an either or thing? Because when I keep hearing about Twitter rivals, it almost seems like you're either with Twitter or against Twitter. Whereas with other social networks, you have your Instagram, you have your TikTok, you have your Snapchat. What is the deal with that?
So I think that there's a couple things going on there. First of all, I think it's worth noting that Instagram's parent company, Meta, is actually experimenting with using some of this very same technology for Instagram in a way that could someday result in cross-platform messages being able to be sent to each other. So I like to think of this as email, right? Like there's yahoo.com has an email handle, right? gmail.com. Back in the days, there was a hotmail.com, you know? There are all these different email providers. And if you'll notice, you can send emails from one to the other. You don't have to have a Gmail account to send an email to a Gmail account. You can do it from any email address. That's what's happening with social media now. What's happening with social media now is standards are being developed that are going to let us send messages to each other across platforms. And I think what's happening actually resembles in a lot of ways what is happening with crypto. Crypto, Bitcoin, and everything in that ecosystem early on identified central banks as the big bad competitors. And they have built networks of we won't say networks in this issue. We'll say economies of users that are sending money back and forth to each other. There are interoperable platforms that let blockchains connect to each other. So you can send Bitcoin to an Ethereum address and Ethereum to a Bitcoin address, and it gets switched automatically in the middle there. We're seeing something really similar happen with social media. Basically, like the emailification of social media, where instead of central banks being the competition, like you see in the crypto space, it's big social is the competition. And these nascent networks that are learning how to interoperate with each other, they're learning how to let competitors move from one network to another. They're actually in the process of learning how to let them send messages from one network to another. And I really do believe that eventually this adoption from the user up instead of from the creator down is going to force these big social network companies to give their users a little more freedom.
Okay, so I believe I saw in your reporting somewhere that Blue Sky will allow someone to move their identity from network to network. And you said you've seen how Blue Sky works. Explain how that's happening.
So at the very base layer of these social networks is something called a protocol, which is really just software that lets different users build with the same infrastructure. Think of like if you think of any industry having maybe 2 or 3 fundamental components of that industry, and everything else is user interface. You can take those 2 or 3 fundamental components of an industry, like for example, social media, identity, and you can actually move that down from a feature layer that people are competing with into the lower level, into the software that everybody has access to. And you can, instead of competing over who has the most followers, who has the most identities on their social network, you can compete for who has the best algorithm that serves you news. You can compete for who has the least bullying. You can compete for who has a political agenda that mirrors your own. You can start to see social networks that are breaking up and serving small little subsets. They are competing for how they serve their customers instead of who has the biggest amount of customers. And then you can move from competitor to competitor to competitor. So for example, right now, the Blue Sky team that is building the protocol, which is called the AT protocol, is really the biggest company that is building on the AT protocol. And so while there are 19 other projects being worked on right now, you can't actively move your profile from Blue Sky to another competitor yet because there aren't any competitors yet. But once that happens, you're essentially running a traditional social media company. You get to choose your own business model. You get to choose your own interface. You get to choose your own design, your own layout. You can build it as uniquely as you could build any other social network. The only thing that's different is the identities themselves. Instead of being a part of the competition, instead of saying, oh, my social network has 5 million users, your social network has 1 million users, so mine is better. All that is in the base layer. And so those people can then take and they can say, oh, this social network over here lets me control my own algorithm. This social network over here lets me organize my responses based on frequency. This one lets me move my posts based on relevance. This one lets me filter out people that are known for being abusive. This one lets me control my algorithm by only showing tweets or posts with photos. And if you let a social network compete over the services they provide instead of how many people are on the social network, the theory is that you're going to start solving a lot of problems about misinformation, et cetera.
I guess my question is, what happens to just having your own website?
How so? You mean?
Yeah, if I have just my individual profile, which is technically my identity, and I can create it in any way I want to reflect me.
Yep.
Is that not me having my own website?
Great question. No, it's not. And you saw that. I think the most high profile example of that was when Donald Trump pissed off a lot of people and lost his access to the account, right? Like, he didn't actually own that in spite of being a very controversial but democratically elected leader. He lost access to all of his users, to all of his followers. He did not own his identity there. He thought he did, but he woke up one day, said the wrong thing, and lost his access to his entire profile. So people that don't like Donald Trump actually really supported that and thought that was a great and smart decision. But it's not difficult to imagine a world where you could find yourself on the wrong side of a different agenda, of a different exercise of free speech, and you could lose your access to that account. Now, in a decentralized world, the creators of these social networks can still shut you up if they want, but you just move to another social network. You have more ability to take your followers with you. If you fall afoul of somebody else's rules, or somebody else's rules fall afoul of you, you can leave.
Maybe I'm too 2023 to make too much sense, but I believe I'm picking up what you're putting down. So everyone has their own profile.
Yes.
That works amongst various social networks, but they all have to stem from what would that be called?
So it's the same protocol. And in that protocol is the way that the identities are created. And since everybody is creating their identities the same way, those identities can move with the user from social network to social network. Like you couldn't take your Facebook friends with you to LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. You couldn't take your TikTok followers to Twitter, because at the protocol level, at the very basic layer of these social networks, they are creating identities differently. But by moving that identity from the feature layer, the top layer of the social networks that everybody is competing over, into the base layer, the shared technology that everybody has access to, you enable a future where once you create your profile, you really do own it. And you really can take your followers with you to a competitor if you want to.
So Jack Dorsey, who handpicked Jay Graber to overlook this project, to be the CEO, he had done this, in 2019?
Correct.
2019.
Well, yes. So sorry to interrupt you. He announced the blue sky concept in 2019. And he announced his desire to fund a team. But he didn't actually appoint Jay until last year, and didn't fund the team until last year either.
Did he see the end of Twitter coming? Did he see the end of all of this coming? I guess that's my question. Was he, by knowing that, or just believing that this was next, did Jack Dorsey, did he see the end of centralized social networks?
Great question. I think the short answer is yes. In fact, if we can take text messages that he sent Elon Musk, that we were able to get access to as a result of a lawsuit that was going on, we know as a fact that that's what he thought. There is evidence before Elon Musk bought Twitter for $44 billion that he was exchanging text messages with Jack Dorsey, where Jack told him point blank that Twitter's first mistake, its original sin, was becoming a company. He told Elon Musk that Twitter never should have been a company, that Twitter should have been a decentralized shared protocol open to the world. And interestingly, Elon actually responded in those text messages by saying, interesting, we'll have to look into that. He seemed to be open to the idea of decentralizing. But going back to that first impulse that Jack was indicating there, we can go all the way back to, I think it's 2007, 2008, when some of Twitter's very, very early developers actually federated Twitter. They actually connected Twitter to a competing social network and briefly enabled the ability to move from one platform to another. Now, it was never activated, at least not in any large scale way, but it was a fork in the road where if Twitter had gone one way instead of the other, we never would have had a Mark Zuckerberg. We never would have had a Jack Dorsey. These characters that made billions of dollars off of our personal information by owning our identities and selling us goods off of what they learned about us, that never would have happened because we would have had access to our own identities. We would have been able to control our own identities. And when Jack, by his own recollection, by his own account, was forced to censor Donald Trump because he thought it was the right thing for the company, you can see the gears moving in his mind that he was regretting having to do that, and he wished he'd never had the power. And in a lot of ways, I think Blue Sky is Twitter was his attempt to turn the clock back on Twitter and to undo the original sin and to open it up to letting Twitter users move their profiles onto competitors and vice versa.
Do you think Jack was just trying to clean his hands of Twitter?
I think Jack might have been trying to clean his hands of a guilty conscience. I don't know that he necessarily wanted to clean his hands of Twitter. I really do get the impression that he really loved the company. Incidentally, he did not respond to any of our requests for interview. Not that I'm bitter about that or anything. I think that I get the impression he wants Jay Graber, the CEO of Blue Sky, to get the rightful credit as the leader of the organization, and he's kind of taken a step back. But everything indicates that he loved Twitter and was kind of sad to see what it had become in the name of building a successful company, and kind of wanted to undo some of those original sins.
So I want to go back a little bit to Elon Musk.
Yes.
You wrote, Elon Musk won't play along, but he is providing an opening for the project nonetheless. And this is referring to Blue Sky. What do you mean by that?
So Elon fired 6,000 people shortly after buying Twitter. Sorry, take that again. Elon fired 6,000 people shortly after buying Twitter. Among those people was an entire team that Jack Dorsey had hired to do nothing but open up Twitter, to decentralize Twitter, to give potential competitors access to data, to let other companies build on the Twitter software. Elon fired that. He ended all that. He's going to make this a profitable company come hell or high water. And he did not believe that opening it up and letting other companies build on it was the way to do that. But interestingly, a lot of these decentralized social networks have actually been around for a while. Mastodon has been around for, I think, 7 years, 8 years. But over the first 99% of its life, they only had 300,000 users. They now have many, many millions of users, and that uptick started almost the day Elon bought Twitter. So what Elon did to sort of enable the decentralized social world wasn't by opening up the technology. It wasn't by building on the ideas that Jack had tried to impart him before the acquisition. It was by closing down. It was by shutting off. It was by censoring people when he said he was going to enable free speech. It was by closing off access when he said he was going to open it. And that decision to sort of clamp down on Twitter is what triggered, in a lot of ways, the explosion of users on these other sites.
And in your reporting, you said an analyst from Insider Intelligence predicts that more than 30 million people will leave Twitter by 2024.
Yes. So this analyst, I actually had a chance to speak with her, and the methodology seems sound to me. It's interesting, the process by which that exodus was supposed to be triggered did not happen as quickly as they thought it would. And while they're still doubling down on the fact that this flight is going to happen, they're not positive it's going to happen at the same speed that they thought it was. In fact, they think it might actually happen a little more slowly. But I have to say, I'm going to take a little issue with that. I don't interpret it the same way. If you add up just the three social networks that I mentioned, Nostr, Mastodon, and Blue Sky, keeping in mind that Blue Sky hasn't even launched yet, we're just talking about this roughly 1.5 million users on their wait list, that's about 20 million people. That's about 20 million people that, for all practical purposes, are already logged into a Twitter competitor. That's within a matter of 6 months. So there's some arguments to be made that maybe the lack of a mature, easy to use for our mom and dad decentralized social network might have meant that exodus was slower than some analysts were expecting. But if you take a look at all of the accounts that have been created accumulatively, I think you are actually starting to see the market, so to speak, demanding this kind of decentralization.
So, Michael, I want you to connect the players. We've
Yes.
mentioned 3 people: Jay Graber,
Yep.
Jack Dorsey,
Yep.
and Elon Musk.
Yes.
What's the connection there?
Great. So it starts with Jack Dorsey when he was still CEO of the company, announcing the idea for an organization, he knows not what, called Blue Sky, that would basically move social networks into the protocol layer, decentralized social networks. And he announced plans to fund that. Shortly after that, a team of about a dozen developers, including Jay Graber, was invited to a private chat where they all kind of sat around informally brainstorming. These were kind of true believers. A lot of them were early social media developers, early members of Twitter, people that wrote standards that are now behind the messages that Apple and Google send to each other. Like really smart, accomplished people kind of working for free, really, brainstorming. And we were able to take a look at some of those early conversations, and you could kind of see that there was no real formal leader. And Jack and Parag, the now former CEO of Twitter, since Elon took over, kind of just like asked some questions and took a step back and let these smart people kind of brainstorm. From that brainstorming, Jay Graber emerged as a sort of unofficial leader. She started writing and publishing articles. She started sharing her own research based on the social media site she had built before, and kind of took control in an unofficial way. Now, unfortunately, for a lot of reasons, COVID hit. The COVID and the ensuing quarantine around it actually slowed down their adoption or their building almost to nothing for about 2 years. Jay actually got so concerned that she might be losing the chance to change Twitter that she applied for another job at Twitter as their head of crypto and actually got the job. So when Parag, the then CEO, or the soon-to-be new CEO of Twitter, called Jay to offer her the job, she had to choose. Do I want to try and change Twitter from within and take the head of crypto position, or do I want to try and change Twitter from without and take the CEO of Blue Sky position? She opted to take the CEO of Blue Sky position. So after 2 years of working sort of informally and brainstorming with this team of developers and social activists, she sort of moved forward with that leadership role. Now, in the middle of that process is when Elon started talking about buying Twitter. And Jay and her team were kind of like in this gray area, wondering what would happen to their project once Elon bought it. They went forward full steam ahead as if everything was going to be just fine. In fact, I spoke with one of the people in charge of helping Twitter open up that Jack had appointed, and they had an entire presentation that was ready to show Elon about why decentralization was a good move for Twitter. Elon never saw it. The early interest that he expressed in those text messages to Jack and the idea of decentralizing Twitter, at very least, as of now, seems to be just a theoretical interest, which left Jay Graber and the Blue Sky team kind of out in the cold, so to speak. They still had $13 million capital raised. They still had a brilliant team of developers, but they didn't have a first user. So, i.e. Twitter. So they had to race to sort of build the first user. And while the protocol itself, like I said, is called the AT protocol, Blue Sky is the first company that is building on the AT protocol. And interestingly, not by any coincidence, they're making it look almost exactly like Twitter so that they can show how easily it would be for them to adopt it if Elon ever changed his mind.
Okay. So that's the connection. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you said it's AT protocol, right?
Yes.
AT protocol. I'm almost wondering, with this, let's just use Facebook as an analogy. The same way Facebook owns what? Instagram, WhatsApp. That's what I got right now. With this AT protocol, AT protocol and the networks that it powers, does that make AT protocol like the controller of it all? So if they decide to shut down all of those profiles on all of those social media platforms you have, if something goes wrong down here, it's all gone.
Great question. There is a lot of intellectual property law around the idea of open source software. For the most part, once you license something underneath one of these open source software agreements, those terms are very clear and transparent, and that open source software isn't going to just disappear. So once you give away a code base to the public and you share the license by which you have done that, it's very, very difficult, impossible to actually go back on that promise. That kind of overlooks the question of what happens if the code stops working, what happens if a new code base comes out that's more efficient and you want to change that code base. There does still need to be people maintaining that code base. And right now, the AT protocol is being built and maintained by the Blue Sky team, which is also the first user. But the goal is eventually to sort of spin off the AT protocol into a separate standalone organization. This is very similar to what Linus Torvald did with the Linux Foundation, where he wrote a bunch of super powerful code that now powers a huge amount of the of the internet, and gave away the code to the open source community. Anybody can build on it. Anybody can build with it. And there's a nonprofit organization that sort of helps manage that.
Okay. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you for the great questions. It was a pleasure, Rosemary.